When Harry Jerome sprinted down a track, he carried his expectations and the weight of a country on his back. He was a remarkable kid, a remarkable runner, and world record setter in track and field, faster than anyone in the world. That and more intrigued producer Selwyn to record some of Harry's life in a National Film Board documentary called Mighty Jerome. It is my pleasure to welcome Selwyn to Studio 4 to tell us more. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Fanny. Nice to meet you too.
When did you go in search of Harry Jerome, the story of Harry Jerome, and why did you?
Why? Maybe I'll start off with the why. I grew up in Trinidad, and we come from a culture where track and field is extremely, extremely big. And in those days, if you're a sprinter, you wanted to run against the best. I remember sometime in the 60s, it was advertised that a Canadian sprinter by the name of Harry Jerome was going to be coming to Trinidad to compete. And I think the whole country was just excited by this concept of a Canadian sprinter. What used to happen in all of those international track meets, they would bring down the American sprinters who dominated at the time. Unfortunately, Harry didn't make it. I was never sure what was the reason why he never showed up in Trinidad. A few years later, I ended up in Canada, studying at the University of Alberta. And then one of the profs was actually teaching a class on physical education, specifically track and field, and referred to Harry as a quitter. And for some reason, that sort of stood out with me because I could never reconcile the idea of an athlete training his body to the ultimate to participate in the Olympics and then for whatever reason deliberately pulling out of a race. So that sort of stayed with me, you know, something that I'd like to explore, you know. And then eventually I got into filmmaking and I started making films about Canadian heroes and wanted to go beyond their stories. So Harry was always on my radar for the last 35, 40 years, even more than that. I joined the National Film Board, came to Vancouver in 1997, and of course, this is where Harry was from. And so the idea kept coming. Instead of the back burner, I started moving towards the front burner, so to speak. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, Phil Fraser came out with a book, Running Uphill, The Fast, Short Life of Harry Jerome. And so that was sort of the sort of turning point, but it's just an idea that sort of was there. For whatever reason, it stayed with me, and so I went back to it.
Well, this city was in complete shock, and I'm sure much of the world in shock, when Harry Jerome died from a brain aneurysm at 42.
42.
Wasn't Judy Strongman driving him across the Lionsgate Bridge?
Exactly, and he had just come out of a hospital within a few days to go to the funeral of a good friend of his, the former holder of the record. I can't remember his name right now, but Paul Wynn, and a number of his very close friends had gone out for lunch. And so she was driving him across the Lionsgate Bridge to North Vancouver, and he started having a seizure in the car. And she took him back to the hospital, and he didn't make it. He was 42 years old.
42 years old. Yeah. Take me back to the young Harry, the young runner. Born in Saskatchewan, went to school in North Vancouver, one of 3 black kids, I think, in the school at that time.
Yeah. Well, basically, from what we learned from John Minicello, who was his coach at that time, said there were only 3 black kids in the school. It was Harry, Valerie, and Paul Wynn.
Valerie, his sister.
Valerie, his sister. And so Harry was always involved in a lot of sports. He played hockey, he played baseball, you know, he played soccer. But within his high school is when he started running. And as a high school is when he came close to, you know, equaling the record of the great Percy Williams. And that's when he sort of got, as Paul Wynn says in the film, that's when he got his international notoriety, because he was a 19-year-old who had equaled the world record.
Sure, lots of pressure.
Lots of
How
pressure.
fast was he?
Well, he was pretty fast. I mean, like, when you understand that he was running the 100 meters in close to 10 seconds flat. He actually ran it in 9.9. And in the film, somebody says, I think it was Bruce Kidd, says that the officials couldn't believe that anybody could run that fast. So they rounded it off to 10 seconds flat. And the holder of the world record at the time was Armin Harry, a German sprinter. So he then co-shared the record with Armin Harry.
Well, they were hand timing in those days. No
digital,
none of that. So they said, oh, he couldn't possibly have been that fast. Let's just round it off.
Right.
His weaknesses, personally? Was he arrogant or shy or lovely? What? What did you learn about the boy?
In the film, after Harry retired, you know, CBC made a documentary about him. And he was just talking about where he came from. At age 19, he had established this record. He had gone to the Pan Am Games, and he had never gone out of Canada prior to that. So he was shy, he was uncomfortable, didn't know how to deal with the media. So what he is saying is that he came across as being cocky or arrogant. And a lot of the media, most of whom were from down east Toronto, they couldn't understand this attitude. I mean, he was, quote, as Alan Fotheringham says in the film, he was our boy. You know, everybody was proud of him. There were all of these expectations, but he did not have that sort of confidence, you know, to deal with the media. So he says...
Who does?
Who does, exactly. And he says, maybe I came across as being cocky. And then he smiles towards the camera and he says, maybe I was.
Let's take a look at that. We have a clip.
Okay.
The Canadian media are going nuts. They're saying Jerome, the spoiled kid, Jerome, the quitter. That's really where he started to get that reputation of being a bad boy with the media.
Here they were very cruel. They were not only lambasting me, you know, for my performance on the track, but also hitting at me personally. As far as the press is concerned, generally, they've sort of misunderstood me. I mean, I started my track career in 1959, and I made the Pan American Games, and I never even heard of the Pan American Games. 60, I suddenly was in the Olympic Games, and I was just out of high school. So I was scared and somewhat reluctant to communicate with them, and they probably thought I was a cocky little kid, and maybe I was.
Maybe he was.
Maybe he was. But the Eastern press really took after him. They really bit him.
They certainly did. And I'm not sure what the reason was. We've got people there who we interviewed, like Alan Fotheringham, Brian Pound, and Len Corbin. So certainly the people who are based in the West who knew about him, they were supported and they tried to understand him. As a producer, I think what attracted me to this story is that I was trying to figure out exactly whether this was racially motivated, whether it was regionally motivated, but where was it coming from? It just seemed as though one person would write a negative article, and the negative article became the fallback article, and everybody just quoted from that.
Well, sure, and remember the Times. I mean, to be black in North Vancouver was an unusual thing. Not to be black, but to the prejudice of the Times, and it was sort of hushed in Canada, a little more so than in the United States. But he felt it, and his family felt it, and his dad was a porter. Who helped him when he was recruited by Oregon State, the infamous Bill Bowerman?
Right.
Who was by his side to guide him down his athletic trail?
There was nobody. There was nobody. I mean, essentially, he grew up with Paul Wynn. There were the only two black students at the high school. Whatever problems he might have faced at that time, he certainly would have discussed that with his, best friend, Paul Wynn. When he applied to go to Oregon State, he got through. Paul did not get through. Paul went to UBC. So in going to America, having grown up in Canada, the way how black athletes would have been treated at that time was completely different.
And no black athletes in the NFL.
Something that he would not have been familiar with, So I think he ends up being literally torn. You're Canadian, you're perceived as being, quote, a black American. There's no distinction between a black Canadian and a black American. All of his teammates would have been, white and black, but the cultures were significantly different. So that would have been extremely challenging for him.
And different for Paul Wynn because his black roots run deep here, as you know. Who said about Harry Jerome, this kid thinks he's white?
Paul.
Was it Paul?
Paul says that. And, you have to see that within the context. Essentially, Harry was from an interracial family, so he straddled both sides of the racial divide. But the point is, he was perceived as being, quote, black.
Yes, his mother was white, his father black, and in those days, too, the hurdles they had to cross, a biracial marriage.
Yes. that would have been extremely significant. So I would say it was fortunate that he had somebody like Paul, and Paul would joke with him and say, well, he had no rhythm, he couldn't dance, and so on. But these things are culturally derived, you know. So.
Absolutely. And Paul could say that way because
exactly.
he was the same color. But racial prejudice on or off the track, it was there.
It was there.
In many ways. His post-athletic career, Minister of Sport, wasn't he? And Minister, he worked with Trudeau, I know, he taught.
Was Sport Canada, and he had the special mandate where he went around and tried to introduce physical education programs to the schools and so on. And I think he always had that from when he went to Oregon State. One of the things that he did that a lot of people are not familiar with, he would go to the politicians and try to get lights, for example, in some of the places where kids can play soccer when there was no light, you know. He would get running shoes from the suppliers and give them to the kids.
Exactly. Well, and as you say, 3 Olympics, 7 world records, but the greatest comeback, perhaps in track and field history, and people will have to watch the documentary to get that. But he was injured, had a hole in his leg and lost power, and they thought he would never run again.
Exactly. They thought he would never walk again.
Never walk again.
Less, you know.
But he did.
He did.
So hence, the Mighty Jerome.
Thank you.
Or Mighty Jerome.
Mighty Jerome.
So this will be screening Thursday, tomorrow, 7 p.m., Richmond City Hall.
Correct.
Great. Nice to meet you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
This was directed by?
Charles Officer.
Charles Officer.
Charles Officer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Selwyn Jacob, producer, Mighty Jerome.